Now, here's where the instant feedback of the blogosphere and the smart, demanding in the best sort of way readers of the H&N keep you honest. Toward the end of my exhausting 2-week pre-election day blogathon, I succumbed to what I call a case of blogger's envy. I saw that the short, snappy, contentious entries and titles were generating all the traffic. I was also exhausted. It was November, so it was toward the end of the semester, stack of papers, writing commitments, family commitments. And so after Barack Obama's closing infomercial, I wrote more of a quick reaction piece than a historical analysis, and I titled it, "Barack's Infomercial Too Cheesy for Potential President." I had expected a sort of address, and instead he was sort of reduced to the role of narrator of this little campaign skit, it seemed. One reader caught me, objected to my punting, and immediately threw down a penalty flag. "The piece is okay," he wrote, "unlike its title, but where's the history? The sociological analysis? This is Troy's reaction, I have mine. To make the grade and get on and get on H&N, shouldn't a piece have some work on it so we can learn from it?" Fifth, and finally, keep them guessing as to where I stand politically. I've always said that the best compliment I can get at the end of teaching a course on modern American history, or at the end of commenting on a contentious issue on television, is when a student or a TV producer asks me, "Well, Professor Troy, I'm confused. Are you a liberal or a conservative?" I believe my job in the classroom and as a blogging historian, and I call it as a historical blogger, is to avoid plunging into partisanship and to stimulate debate rather than to dictate thought or preach. I also think that partisan positions have become too rigid and far too simplistic. Our job as academics is to embrace the complexity of reality, even at the cost of ideological consistency. I take as my standard that profound philosopher, New York's former mayor Ed Koch, who said, "If you agree with me on 9 out of 12 issues, vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 out of 12 issues, please see a psychiatrist." Historians need to use the public platforms we're privileged to be offered to give, that we're privileged to be given, to give historical perspective, rather than to provide partisan screeds behind using some historical camouflage. I think our profession would benefit from fuller discussion of the perils of insta-history and trying to develop some do's and don'ts to follow when we're invited to appear in the media or blog as historians. As a lowly historian in the trenches, I'm not aware of any AHA or OAH guidelines on this, and in preparation for this talk, I sort of looked around, and you can pull some things out of the AHA statement on standards of professional conduct, but there really isn't much of a conversation about this. We need to develop what we might once upon a time called our fiduciary role, but now we see that the bankers don't do that very well either. So many historians, it seems, have spent so much time over the last few decades blurring the line between the personal, the political, the professional, that it's gotten very confusing. I think we need to ask what professional and, yes, what political constraints do we impose on ourselves in our professional capacities as historians. And of course, it has to be voluntary. I don't want big brother or big sister imposing it on us. And I know I'm in the minority here. I know many of my colleagues disagree with my attempts to try to hover above the fray and champion the center. My 2 most controversial posts during the campaign, one at the beginning and one at the end of the campaign, illustrate this tension. Early on, I objected when the group Historians for Obama formed. I was not arguing against Obama or against individual historians standing up as citizens and supporting Obama. I opposed hijacking our collective credibility and giving any candidate our imprimatur as historians. I suggested that we behave cautiously when we act as historians collectively, not frittering away our scholarly authority on divisive partisan issues and fleeting candidacies, even historic candidacies. Many respondents strongly disagreed, arguing they were exercising their democratic rights and they were simply following the rules of the game that so many others adhere to. An equally controversial post was titled, "A Partisan Myopia Test. Who was willing to denounce both Sarah Palin and Al Franken as unqualified?" Now, a few respondents objected to the doubts I cast on Governor Palin's credentials to be vice president. But boy, respondents were really steamed by my daring to suggest that Al Franken was unqualified to be a senator, by my attack on him and saying that his brand of simplistic, punchline-driven, vulgar, polarizing political rhetoric harmed the American political system, and was precisely the kind of rhetoric we as academics, as intellectuals, as educators, as teachers need to repudiate. I think Franken would be thrilled to know how many fans he has among the professoriate. And I, for one, was depressed at how difficult it was to find individuals willing to both denounce Palin and Franken. I say, of course, disappointed, but I wasn't surprised. These days, in the historical profession and beyond, it's not easy being a moderate. Despite widespread grumbling about President George W. Bush for being too headstrong and polarizing, both Barack Obama and John McCain were scorned this summer whenever they played to the center. Reporters mocked McCain's Macarena, sliding right then left, along with Obama's policy pirouettes. More disturbing, I think we saw how the gravitational physics of American politics pulls candidates to the right or to the left. There were few institutional, ideological, media forces pulling them to the center. As our students would say, you don't get props for being in the center. In mid-June, when John McCain insisted on reading the Supreme Court's decision on Guantanamo before condemning it, conservative bloggers jumped down his throat and blasted his tepid response. I don't know. I thought it was a good thing to have a candidate who wants to read a Supreme Court decision before bashing it. Similarly, Obama's musings on the eve of his trip to Iraq that by visiting Iraq he might modify his position triggered such a firestorm that within hours he had to have a press conference saying, I didn't really mean it. And we saw just recently in his Tuesday night press conference, Obama himself saying, isn't it good for me to learn about an issue or study something before I start snapping? Watching this vacuum in the center, seeing how the MoveOn.org crowd pulled Obama left and the National Review, Rush Limbaugh types pulled McCain to the right, I sought metrics to assess moderation, how to give some of those props, and forces to encourage centrism. I invited student volunteers to develop what I called a moderometer, to gauge a candidate's centrism, both tactically and ideologically, charting particular positions and moves on a color-coded spectrum between red and blue, with the elusive purple as that desired sweet spot in the middle. More broadly, in my book, Leading from the Center, Why Moderates Make the Best Presidents, I argued that our constant descent into partisanship is destructive. America needs muscular moderates, nimble, adaptable, but anchored in core values. We need presidents who think first and bluster later, who adjust positions based on often messy facts. Running toward the center to lead from the center is the right thing to do and the shrewd political move to make. And of course, neither McCain nor Obama was a Johnny-come-lately to centrism. Moderation was central to both their identities. Both appealed to independents who were disgusted by the perpetual fights pitting Fox News cheerleaders against MoveOn.org critics. Historically, I argue that muscular moderates, not spineless centrists, inhabited the great American center. This moderation is rooted in principle, tempered by practicalities. It's anchored in nationalism, modified by civility. In the White House, it included George Washington's reason, urging Americans to rally around the common cause. It's Abraham Lincoln's pragmatism, understanding that he first had to focus on union so the nation would survive before taking on the moral challenge of freeing the slaves. It was even Theodore Roosevelt, understanding that his role as the president of the plain people was to create a kind of bully-bully romantic nationalism that people could rally around. And Franklin Roosevelt, seeing just how radical some of the solutions were, and just how complacent many of the business community wanted him to be, finding through his experimental incrementalism a middle and repositioning the middle when necessary.